If Najee Harris is going to be the focus point of the Steelers offense, what does he need to improve to be that much better in his second season in the NFL? Joining me today from SteelersNow.com, my partner in crime, Nick Farabaugh, is going to talk about that. And we are both live at the Steelers press conference at Acrisure Stadium, where Art Rooney II was talking about the new deal. We'll give our perspective on that, as well as Najee Harris and AFC North running backs, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content when we have breaking news updates. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Joining me today is my partner in crime, my man at SteelersNow.com, and host of the Locked On Pitt podcast, Nick Farabaugh. He's back on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Nick, what's up?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me on, Chris. Always a great pleasure to be on the Locked On Steelers podcast, man. Always appreciate it.
Always great to have you on. Do check out Locked On Pitt if you have not already. Nick does a great job. If you're a Pitt fan or an aspiring Pitt fan, because they're going to have a really big year, a lot of people predict, you want to check out Locked On Pitt to get all of your daily show information, just like you do here for Locked On Steelers. But Nick, you and I co-wrote an article on SteelersNow.com. You, me, and Alan Saunders, our fearless leader over at SteelersNow.com. We were breaking down our rankings of AFC North running backs. We did quarterbacks last week. We did running backs this week. Now, I suggest y'all go to SteelersNow.com because we break down each of the rankings and why we say certain guys should be where. Universally, we all said Nick Chubb, number one running back in the AFC North right now. No arguments. He's a great running back, doing a great job for the Cleveland Browns. But where our first disparity or our first difference that we saw was both you and Alan had Joe Mixon as the number two running back in the AFC North, which I ain't mad at y'all for doing. But I had Najee Harris simply because I think Najee Harris did what he did with so much less than what Joe Mixon had. And I know Joe Mixon doesn't have a great offensive line or nothing in Cincinnati, but he has a quarterback that people feared. And with the receivers that they had, defenses would be at their peril to pay too much attention to Joe Mixon, whereas they were very happy to pay all the attention to Najee Harris for the Steelers offense. That was one thing that I looked at it there. But I want you to give your reasoning. Today's show is going to talk a lot about what Najee needs to improve upon this upcoming year. But before we get to that point, Nick, I wanted to hear your reasoning. What Najee had, where's the difference between Najee and Joe Mixon right now to make Mixon the number two and Najee the number three?
Yeah, I said this when we talked about it earlier today, and I stand by it in that I think Joe Mixon's vision is on another level compared to Najee. And I know that's like, I'm not calling Najee a bad running back because, it's not like he doesn't have vision. He definitely has glimpses where I think he showcases that. But I often say this about Najee. I think he's so gifted laterally in just terms of his quickness and how well he moves at his size. Like, we're talking about a 6'2", 240 guy that moves with the quickness of like a 5'10", 200 guy. Laterally, it's really special. I think he saw at Alabama in high school, and he's developed these habits where he realizes he can just bounce them outside and run you over, beat you, however. And in the NFL, you can't do that because your guys are bigger, faster, stronger, and smarter. And they're all of that at this level. And Najee got caught really trying to bust the big play a lot and try to bounce it outside. And he wasn't taking stuff that was there sometimes. And again, it wasn't a lot of the time. There was stuff there. And I think that is relevant context. But part of Najee's, lack of efficiency last year, and I say that a lot, people say, well, how can you say he wasn't efficient? It was the offensive line. And yeah, it definitely was part of the offensive line. I mean, the guy was hitting the backfield a good bit of the time, but he didn't have a good yards per carry. And that does matter to a degree. I mean, 3.8 yards per carry, even if your O-line's bad, it should probably be a little bit better than that. And part of that is because Najee's trying to bounce it outside, and he's not necessarily feeling out the kind of the rhythms of what this defense is trying to give him. There's a few plays I have on Twitter that I've highlighted before where I say, Najee Harris is bouncing this outside, and Mixon doesn't do that. Mixon's a veteran. He takes what you give him, and he's really elusive too. So he kind of combines the best of both worlds, where he creates for himself. And Najee creates for himself by breaking and evading tackles. And that's what Najee does. And Mixon does that too. But there's another way to create for yourself, and that's manipulating second level defenders. And that's drawing that linebacker into the B gap and cutting to the A gap, because you see that developing. And I think that anticipation of what's going to open up is something we have to see from Najee, and not kind of over anticipating things or trying to make too much happen. Like that's the big thing for me.
And I hear that, because that is a very important part of the running back position. That's something that after Le'Veon Bell left, I felt like the Steelers didn't have. James Conner, when it was there, when everything was there for him, if the first guy that he met was 3 or 4 yards downfield and he had picked up momentum, he could win those battles. But where the Steelers needed those things to happen is if a defender was in the hole, or if it was one-on-one within the, like close to the line of scrimmage. If Najee Harris wins that and the rest of the blocking is done, he can rip that off for a big play. I do think Najee Harris, he does need to improve his vision. He does need to work on making those second level misses, more consistent. But I also think part of it is because to get to the second level, he had to take on multiple guys. I mean, there were so many times where there would be 3 defenders in his area and he would make 2 of them miss and then drag the other one for 2 yards. And it was just remarkable sometimes how he was able to get what yardage that he got. And again, this is a guy with 1,200 yards on 307 carries. You look at that. That's a lot of production, and he never fumbled in the regular season. His first fumble came in the playoffs when he was recovering from an injury that he suffered in less than a week before that game. Again, I look at where Najee Harris is at. I truly believe if the Steelers are able to get a better offensive line situation, and I'm not saying top 10, I'm just saying get them back to being in the middle of the league. Let James Daniels be an actual right guard who grows with this team and can lead the offensive line. Let Mason Cole be just better than Kendrick Green at center. Let Kevin Dotson or Kendrick Green, whoever wins the left guard position, be a more aggressive player in their spots. Let Dan Moore Jr. kind of hold his position down. Let Chukuma Okorafor be a more refined technician. I think as a starting 5, you can still get a good performance from that group. And if you get just even a decent performance, just middle of the line performance from those guys, I think that gives Najee Harris the boost that he needs. It also depends on the quarterbacking and how big the receivers and tight ends are in making plays. But if they do all those things, I think that we're going to be looking at Najee Harris and saying, oh yeah, so he could do what Joe Mixon did last year. Just Joe Mixon had the benefit of playing on a Bengals offense that was loaded last season.
Yeah, well, you look at the per game evaded tackles. I mean, Najee has 6 and Mixon has about 4. So, I mean, Najee's clearly better in the open field in that regard. But this is what I try to say when I because I don't want to mean it as like Najee's bad. Najee's a phenomenal back.
I know what you mean.
Running back, and I think some people don't criticize Najee at all because he was so good last year and they literally made the playoffs probably because of Najee about as much as anyone. So he's a phenomenal player. So let me let that be known. I think this guy, his potential and the fact that he was this good while having this big of a gaffe in his game, like decision-making vision lapses are big. But the fact that he's pretty much top 10 back with that should speak to what a freak this guy is. And so basically, here's how I would describe it to you.
Hold on, Nick. I want to actually. You're about to make a great point, but I want to save that for the second segment so that we can keep the show rolling because we do have to get an ad read in here. But hold your thought because that's exactly where I wanted to go with this second segment about what he must do to improve, to take it to that next level where he's in the sentences with the Derrick Henrys of the world and the Nick Chubbs instead of the Joe Mixons. Even though Joe Mixon's pretty good, he ain't in the upper tier of running backs. We'll get to Nick's point in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Dave. Now, if you don't know what Dave is, it's this awesome new banking app that's become one of our great sponsors, and it's going to really help you kind of get through day to day when you're paying your bills. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or just struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful on your life when unexpected expenses come up, but you have Dave on your side, this new banking app, to help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. That's because Dave is the banking app that helps you get up to $500 instantly with what they call extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest or no credit check that's needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief that they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave right now and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now, and that's DAVE, Dave. Sign up for the extra cash account, and you can get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Again, that's dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. The Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Nick Faribault on the show today. Before we continue, I want to remind you guys we have a special edition coming out on the Locked On NFL channel. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most, starting July 18th on Locked On NFL. Locked On is going to give you the top 50 most valuable players when it comes to the NFL's odd makers at BetOnline. So that's going to be available again July 18th on Locked On NFL or wherever you get your podcasts, and especially on YouTube. We'll be ranking them out. I will give you a preview. 2 Steelers make this list. If you can guess who they are, you're going to be interested to see where they fall on this list. Do check out the Locked On NFL podcast network or the podcast station when July 18th when this hits, or every Friday when I'm on with your boy Q. Anyways, Nick, you were about to make a point about the things that Najee Harris has to do, because you're right. He put himself in like a, hey, obviously this guy is a very special part of the conversation with NFL running backs, but to be the best of the best, to be in that upper tier, which is why they drafted him in the first round, was to be in the upper tier. He has to do these things. What are those things?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Najee, if you look at his stats, he's a high volume, low efficiency back. And that's something that is what he is. That was the fabric of him last year. But, and I say this a lot, Najee Harris is a elusive running back that has great ability to catch the ball, has great hands, can win downfield. I think we didn't see that enough last year. I think that's a part of his game that can break out. He's obviously got to improve a little bit in pass pro, but man, when he put it together last year, he was dominant. And so you feel like that's going to come along. He's just young in that area. But he is a special lateral athlete. He's special sideways. He might not have, and this is another thing, he's never going to have great long speed, right? Like that's just not Najee. Najee's never going to be Nick Chubb. He's never going to be a guy like that. So he is not going to be someone like that. But good guys that are really special sideways tend to go sideways. That's how I would decide this. Najee has to get more north and south, and he's got to start hitting the hole and setting things up for himself. And so even, there were enough examples last year to where you could see he was an inefficient decision maker. And this wasn't just last year. So you could say, okay, it's last year due to the offensive line. This was on his tape at Alabama. This is not just a 1-year thing. This is a thing you see on his college tape. So it is a thing he has to work on. And a lot of that just comes down to slowing the game down a little bit for him, right? Learning to play within himself and learning what to do at this level. I think that did this a lot early in his career is King Henry down in Tennessee. He did this a lot in his career early on. And look what Derrick Henry is doing now. Now, I don't think Najee's the same player as Derrick Henry. I think Derrick Henry's obviously a special dude.
He has that breakaway speed.
Yes, he has it. But he did the same thing because he is so special laterally as well. So Najee just has to get that in himself. If Najee can do that, I'm telling you what Najee will be. Najee's going to be a top 5 NFL running back. This guy's going to be truly up there. And then you might be arguing after this year, say he does take that leap in the decision-making department, man, you might be talking 1A, 1B with him and Nick Chubb. Like that is the legitimate upside of a Najee Harris. He's a special player. If he works out, his ceiling is not even close to what he was last year. And that's the thing. It is not even close to what it was last year. Now, if he stays who he is right now, I don't know, he's a David Montgomery. And that's not a bad thing for him to be either. But if he takes that next leap, man, I mean, we are talking about one of the best running backs in the NFL. He just has to learn, and this is specifically in between the tackles, when running in between the tackles on inside zone, stuff like that. Learn to play with yourself a little bit more. Become that efficient rusher. You're going to see a lot of different things come up, man. And he's going to be a special running back if he can get that figured out.
I do agree with that assessment that he could be special. I think he was special in a lot of ways for the Steelers last year, but you're right. He was not special in the ways that they're going to need him to be in the coming years. Again, I said this before they even drafted him. The Steelers needed to look at a running back who could carry the offense while they look for the new franchise quarterback. And even if you think you found it in Kenny Pickett, the early years of Kenny Pickett are going to need that. That's what Ben Roethlisberger had in Jerome Bettis and Willie Parker. He didn't have to throw the ball all over the place because he had those guys running it. And I think it's also important to point out Jerome Bettis made comments last week, talking about, hey, he feels the running game is in great hands with Najee Harris. He has a hunger to learn and he wants to be, a better player. He said all those things out there. And I think that Jerome Bettis, these are two guys that they met before last season, and the Steelers having their strong connection with their alums, like all the guys that are in the Hall of Fame or even just former Steelers, they bring those guys back. They keep those relationships. And it was very clear because, and we asked Najee Harris a lot about this during the season. It was very clear that, there was a connection between him and Jerome Bettis. Maybe not a long-standing one that was like, they hang out all the time, but in a sense that these guys definitely know who each other are. And Jerome made sure to basically say, hey, I'm going to be watching for you, that type of connection. And more to your point about Najee Harris, needing to take the next step and what he has to do to take the next step. Nick, I think you'd agree with me in saying that when we watch this guy work, when we see this guy come in and how he looks, this guy is taking every effort to be that person. He's not lunching. He's not saying, "Oh, I'm fine. I don't need to improve." Everyone talked about how his body looked when he showed up for OTAs and minicamp, and how just extremely fit he seemed. But it's also how explosive he still seems, how ready he seems at all times, and how he is not skipping any beat. He's not leaving any stone unturned. He wants to have every asset in his arsenal ready to be able to be that best back that he can for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, Najee's the rare back that's quick and explosive, but not fast. You don't really see that a lot. Usually, if you have the quickness, you don't have the explosiveness nor the speed.
Le'Veon Bell was that. I felt that for several years for the Steelers.
Yeah, and it's very rare to find that combination. There's really not many other guys I can name out there right now that don't have that. You have all three, or usually have one, but to have two, some guys might have, the explosiveness, speed, but not the lateral stuff. That's also the kind of 2 out of 3 combination you see. But Najee has the quickness and the burst, and not the speed, which actually makes him pretty special. And that's what makes him such a great player in short areas, and be able to make just something out of nothing. And obviously he's a huge back. He's super physical. He falls forward every single time he gets that football. And again, I think that the other thing we aren't talking about enough is, man, this guy's receiving ability is going to be really good. Really, really good this year. We saw him in training camp last year, dusting guys 50 yards downfield. And like, we didn't see that at all last year. We didn't see him used at all creatively in the passing game. It was dump off Najee.
Right.
Let's see him on like a Texas route. Let's see him on a wheel route.
I'd love to see him on more Texas routes.
I would too, man. I think Najee, with his quickness, would be unbelievable. And that's the thing about Najee, is that quickness allows him to do so much. And he's physical, and he's a very tireless worker, which is going to be the big thing here, right? If he's going to make that leap, and people ask me, is vision a teachable trait? And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's not an easy thing to learn.
Ask Willie Parker, because Jerome Bettis helped him with his vision.
Yeah, exactly. Like, vision can be learned, guys. It can be. And if you see any running back that takes a leap from, say, year 1 to year 2, usually it's because it's either 1, injuries, or 2, their vision got fixed. And that's really what the catalyst for the Derrick Henry breakout was. His vision improved so much that he became the best running back in the NFL. Najee can become one of the best running backs in the NFL. The Steelers have a really special talent in Najee Harris. And if you thought last year was good, I'm telling you, if he fixes that vision, that decision-making, he's going to be in a different stratosphere this year. We're talking about Lev Bell level guy here. I mean, we're talking about that type of production. Najee Harris could be the crux, whether it's Mitchell Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, whoever starts there at quarterback. If Najee takes that leap, Najee can be the crux you lean on. And that's the big thing here, is that Najee Harris, if he fixes that, man, sky's the limit.
I'm on the same page with you as far as fixing that. And I think my ultimate point here is, on top of fixing those things, because he does have things to work on, the Steelers have to make sure they're backing him up with a better offensive line better quarterback play and a more vertical offense that'll space defenses out and force the linebackers and safeties that are creeping up to the line of scrimmage to think more and to give Najee Harris more room to work. Because as much as Derrick Henry did improve his vision, a lot of it was also not like he couldn't have done this, but he was helped by the arrival of Ryan Tannehill, who was able to throw the ball downfield. And again, it's not saying that Ryan Tannehill was the reason that Derrick Henry was having success, but there was a balance there. Ryan Tannehill's not a top 5 quarterback. He's not a guy that's even close to that elite conversation, but he was good enough to say, hey, I can be a decent quarterback while you be a great running back. And if as a decent quarterback, if people are a little worried of my deep ball, it's going to give you more of an opportunity to be the haymaker punch of this offense, or the main engine that makes this go. And I think a similar type of relationship can be established with a Mitchell Trubisky, with a Kenny Pickett, and potentially a Mason Rudolph if he comes into camp and lights it up somehow and wins the competition. But that's again why I think they drafted a Najee Harris, was they wanted to be in a position where if they don't find the next their franchise quarterback right away, if it takes time to figure out who that person is, they're going to have this running back that, while they're figuring out who the franchise quarterback is, that the people who aren't franchise quarterbacks can balance with them, with Najee Harris, and get the offense moving forward.
Yeah, that's the big thing, man. And another thing to mention is, for goodness sakes, get this man a backup running back. I mean, 85% snap share. He was on the field for 85% of the snaps. That's the highest in the NFL. And listen, I looked into this, and you're like, okay, it's the highest, but maybe the next guy is like 84, 83. The second guy was at 75%, and that was David Montgomery. Montgomery missed 4 games. So, like, that is insane. And then you even look at guys like Jonathan Taylor and Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, and they're all like 66% that are on the field for about 2/3. But I mean, no one's scared of Samaje Perine or Jeremy McNichols, but who cares? You're not scared of Nyheim Hines or Jordan Wilkins or whoever, Jonathan Taylor's backup is this year. You're not scared of those guys, but they need breaks. Like, they need to stay fresh, because that's how you keep these guys on the field. Because the Steelers were very lucky last year with the volume he got, with the amount of playing time, that he didn't get hurt until the last game of the year. And he clearly was not himself when they went to Kansas City. He was hurt, and he was not Najee Harris. So, man, they got to make sure that they get someone in here. They need a D'Angelo Williams type behind him. And I think that's the number one thing they got to do right now on this team, is they got to find a backup running back that can give Najee a little bit more time off.
I agree. That's something that has to happen, whether it's someone stepping up on the roster right now or them adding somebody. I talked about that with Doran Dickerson a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about a Jordan Howard type of player who's still sitting in free agency who could help them out. So we'll keep you up to date on what happens there. But there's a lot of things that Najee Harris could do to improve this year. There's a lot of things the Steelers could do to improve around him. But if both happen at the same time, watch out. You could be watching something special. We want to talk about the press conference that we went to see, where Art Rooney II was talking with us, the Steelers reporters, at Acrisure Stadium, because that's what Heinz Field is called now. We'll talk about what we saw, heard, and what we think of all that right in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stay tuned. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Nick Farabaugh. We're talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We just got done with a lot of discussion around Najee Harris and how he needs to improve. But let's take a step back and go back to Acrisure Stadium. Now, I did a lot of yesterday's episode talking about this very thing with the initial announcement. But talking to Art Rooney II, a few things to take away from this. One, he noted how special of a deal this was, and how it wasn't that they didn't want a local representative or a local sponsor, because they certainly tried, and they never closed. He said, "We never closed the door on any of them." It was just that this deal was just a great offer, and if you don't remember what it was $10 million a year for 15 years approximately. So you have that's $150 million into the Steelers' pockets, whereas the last deal was like $57 million over 20 years. So it's a much higher rate than the Heinz deal was there. There was talk that the ketchup bottles may stay, things like that. So all those things are kind of like the background noise of what's going on there. But Nick, I think the bottom line is the Steelers. It's very clear the Steelers don't plan on leaving Acrisure Stadium / Heinz Field anytime soon, and the lease is up in 8 years in 2030. Whereas Mr. Rooney wouldn't talk about that specifically. Nick, it did seem like he was kind of asserting like, hey, like, yeah, the plan is for this to us to still be here when that time comes.
Yeah, I think that was pretty clear that, they are going to stay there for a while. Talked about, putting money back into the stadium and kind of reinforcing it, and adding new things. And that was a big focus. I think that you saw it. Man, that is a 15-year deal for a reason, right? You don't make that deal unless you were planning to stay at Heinz Field, now Acrisure Stadium, for at least the duration of that deal, if not longer. Which I think it will be. I think it'll be longer. I think we're talking about another 20, 25 years here.
I could absolutely see that.
And I think everything he pointed to today kind of said that. It wasn't like a standoffish or back away. I think he really came up there and said, I think he even said, we assume we will extend that lease, which tells me that he wants to be on the North Shore for a very long time here. So I think that's another big thing that you see that and you say, well, the Steelers are going to be in Pittsburgh, the city itself, on the North Shore, right by PNC Park, right by the Science Center, all that. Where you see them right now, I think they're going to be there for a long, long time. I think everything points to that. And another thing is they have a very lucrative naming rights deal now, that they get $10 million a year, and there's no incentive to move this team. And I've heard a lot of talk from people that they could move to the suburbs and all of that, like a lot of other teams are. Like you see, there are 10 teams right now that play in the suburbs. So it's not unheard of in the NFL. If you want to see a list of those teams, it's the Raiders, the Giants, Jets, because they play obviously at East Rutherford, the Bills, the Chargers, and the Rams at SoFi, the Washington Commanders, the Miami Dolphins, the Dallas Cowboys, and the 49ers. So, I mean, there's a good list of teams and a lot of historical franchises too that don't play in the actual city. But the Steelers have always played in Pittsburgh, and they're not going to do that. I can't envision that. Like the joke is, they're going to move to Cranberry. Like, I don't see that happening. I think the North Shore is their home for a very, very long time.
I'm right with you. And I also think it's really important to the legacy of it. As much as people are talking about the legacy of the name Heinz and its connection to the city, I think the legacy of the Steelers being in Pittsburgh is maybe even more important. And I'm not saying Pittsburgh as in like they're going to move to like Birmingham or something like that. I'm talking about Pittsburgh as in within the city limits of Pittsburgh rests the stadium that they play in and that everyone congregates to every Sunday to go see them play. Like you said, there's 10, 11 teams out there that have their stadiums in suburbs, not in the city proper, not in the middle of everything. It is a unique experience. If you're a person listening to the show or watching the show and you haven't been to Pittsburgh and you haven't been to Heinz Field in the North Shore, it is a special experience to go there, because on your way there, you're passing PNC Park, you're passing, a strip of places that you can go eat, drink, hang out, do all your merry stuff. And you're right across the river from downtown Pittsburgh. It is a wonderful experience. It is around a whole lot of stuff. As soon as you're done with the game, you have stuff to do right around you. You don't got to get a car. You can walk out of the stadium and walk in and do a whole bunch of stuff right around you. But there's other places that's not a thing. Like, I've been to University of Phoenix Stadium in Arizona. As soon as you get out of there, you have to drive. You're not walking on the highway to get to somewhere after that's over. That's a unique experience. I think a special experience. And I think that also at the North Shore's location, it's in the middle of downtown. It's like not in the middle of downtown Pittsburgh, but it's right next to downtown Pittsburgh. So if you live in the North Hills of the city, you're coming there from the north to the middle there. If you live in the South Hills, you're coming to the same place. East side of the city, west side of the city, all of that. Everyone's coming to a similar location. But if you put it in, say, Mount Lebanon, if you put it in, say, the North Hills, or you put it in, say, Monroeville, a suburb out in the east, out east of the city, you're going to make it tougher for, different parts of the city to get there. And I think, Art Rooney's point is, hey, we're just thinking long term. We're just thinking smart here. We're talking about the advantages it gives us. And now with this money that's at their hands, the Steelers can use that money to do a lot more with the stadium. He talked about things that they're already fixing up. I just wonder, what are the other things that they could be doing coming up very soon?
Yeah, and that's the thing, man. It's a special experience because you built a whole district essentially.
Yes.
Remember what the
Yeah.
North Shore used to be before PNC Park and Heinz Field were there? I mean, it was very different. Lots of
Mm-hmm.
rundown warehouses. That has completely changed that part of the city, right? It has completely changed that. Why would the city even want the Steelers to move out of there? Like
Right.
that's another thing. And the Steelers themselves don't want to move out of the North Shore. Like they don't. And so, if they want a new stadium, there's room on the North Shore to build a new stadium. And that's the thing. Like, if say they want a new stadium, we'll just build it on the gold lot. There's a ton of land there, and then you can just make the new parking lot be at Heinz Field. That's a huge plot of land, right? Or something to that effect. So like it's interesting that people think they're going to leave the North Shore because I don't see any incentive to that. I don't see where that makes sense. It's not like they're going to make more money outside of the city of Pittsburgh to me. I don't see that. I think that you actually draw more people in because you are on the North Shore. You see things like tours that do pretty well. PNC Park and Heinz Field both do those, and they make a good bit of money from that. And then also, there's just so much that goes into that history of them playing actually in the city. I think that is something that can't be overstated. Some of those other teams I mentioned, they don't have that mystique, right? Buffalo, the Bills have played in Orchard Park forever. The New York teams, they played in East Rutherford for a while. Like a lot of those teams have played in that spot. The Cowboys don't even need introduction. Arlington is literally Jerryland. So that is a special thing in all of itself. So there is stuff to do in some of those areas because they've made it like that. The Steelers don't have that same mystique. Part of the mystique is that you are right on the river going to watch a Pittsburgh Steelers game. You can feel the wind off of the rivers while you're sitting there, maybe in January, watching a potential playoff game come up.
Yep.
Like that is part of the mystique of the entire thing, and that adds to the experience. And I think that the Rooney family, as much as maybe, they didn't stay local or anything like that, and they have shown maybe a little bit more tendency to break a little bit of tradition, I can't see them breaking a tradition like that, where it means so much to the fabric of who the Steelers are. I mean, at that point, you're going to have 100+ years playing in the city by the time they're ready to look elsewhere. And so I can't see them doing it. And also, they own that whole part. They own that whole plot of land. Like, what's the point? What's the point of giving that up? Makes no sense.
I agree with that entirely. We'll keep you up to date with anything else that happens on the Steelers front, but it is Acrisure Stadium. I'm sure I'm going to call it Heinz Field several times on this show, as I get used to it. Even when the season starts, it's going to be in a bit of adjustment. But hey, there's good reasons for it, and the Rooney's got plans for how to beef up the Steelers facilities and help the organization, maintain their position in the city, even for a much longer term. So we'll talk more about that as the season rolls along and as we learn more information. But Nick, thanks so much for joining the show. Thanks as always for doing the things that you do for SteelersNow.com and Locked On Pitt. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, guys, you can follow me right there at Faribault FB that you see on the graphic. Make sure to follow me, post all the Steelers stuff there, articles, film, whatever you may want, my opinions. Make sure to subscribe to the Locked On Pitt podcast. We're on all the same platforms Locked On Steelers podcast is. So if you want to listen to it, you can listen to it. If you want to watch it on YouTube, make sure to head over there, subscribe, do all of that great stuff. Obviously, check out SteelersNow.com to read all of the articles.
Do check it out. They do great. He does great stuff on Locked On Pitt, and we do great stuff on SteelersNow.com. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, also writer for SteelersNow.com. You can check out this show just like you check out Locked On Pitt, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the subscribe link to our YouTube channel, like the video, do all the things to support us because we appreciate that support at all times. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. I get you a shout out at the end of the show. Thanks so much, Nick, for joining the Locked On Steelers podcast again. You can tune into us any point in time, but we'll be back tomorrow, this Thursday, with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers with right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.